Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today marks the 400th episode of my complete analysis, and I am really excited to have gotten here, so thank you all so much for the support. The chorale we're looking at today is Von Gott, nicht, lassen, which translates to I don't want to leave God. This is an unusual chorale. It has some quirky harmonic tidbits that we'll go through as we get to them, especially going on here in the second system. I feel like I always point to like this part of the page whenever I analyze a chorale that has something quirky about it. It's always just like in and around here, so that's kind of fascinating, but probably not too much to read into that. We're just going to hop right into the analysis. So 2 sharps in the key signature. We start on F sharp major and we end on B major. So I reckon the overall tonality of this chorale is B minor. We start off with our 5 chord, passing 7th in the bass, and then we get B minor in first inversion, D, B, F sharp, and B, which is 1-6, and then we get C sharp, A sharp, E, and C sharp, this B being a 7-6 suspension over the bass. That would be A sharp diminished over C sharp, which is 7-6, and we would expect a B minor triad after that in root position, most likely. B, B, D, and D, 2 roots and 2/3, but still implying a B minor triad. And we get a passing 7th in the bass, but we also get the 5th of the chord here with F sharp in the alto. And I do think this is actually the point where we go to the key of F sharp, because we see G sharp happening here in the bass, along with E sharps and D sharps throughout the rest of the phrase. And that makes sense because our chorale ends this phrase in an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of F sharp minor. So we're going to say this B minor chord is also our 4 chord in the key of F sharp minor. And then this G sharp, B, B, and E is actually kind of interesting. It's an E major chord in first inversion, which is our subtonic 7th, 7-7, as opposed to our diminished 7th, which is what we saw on beat 2. We then have E, which is a chord tone, B, which is a chord tone, G sharp, which is a chord tone, and E, which is a chord tone, which is actually just taking the chord and putting it in root position very briefly before we go to A, B, G sharp, and C sharp. Another interesting chord here, I think what's happening here is, I think this chord is F sharp minor over A, and even though we have B and G sharp happening here in the inner voices, I think we have a double suspension going on. So the B is a 9-8 suspension over the bass, and the G sharp is a 7-6 suspension over the bass. And then the resulting tones, the A natural and the F sharp, are our chord tones, and this B just creates an interesting counterpoint where we have this 9 here that turns into a 7, which is definitely unusual. But I think with chords like these, you have to be a little bit creative and look for the greater context of how the harmony is operating around at the intervallic level. And intervallically speaking, I think the aggregate of everything that's going on here is F sharp minor, so 1-6. And it's also part of a greater 4-7-1 progression. It makes sense from a narrative standpoint as well. We then get C sharp, G sharp, E sharp, and C sharp, which is our 5 chord in root position. C sharp major, neighbor tone here in the alto. C sharp is a chord tone, E is a chord tone, B is our chordal 7th. It's the delayed passing 7th, but we do get a fully voiced 5-7 chord here on the end of the beat before we go to our 1, F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A. Tonic triad, root position. Alright. The second phrase of the A section is going to take us to B minor. We end the phrase with an imperfect authentic cadence, which is kind of interesting. We would expect this C sharp to resolve down to B, but in the melody it goes down to F sharp, which is kind of interesting. We start the phrase off with F sharp minor again, no need to reanalyze, passing 7th in the bass, kind of similar to the way that we started off the first phrase as well, except for instead of F sharp major, we have F sharp minor. And then we get B minor here over D, D, B, F sharp, and B, which is, in this case, our 4 chord in first inversion, but it's actually going to be our tonic triad in the key of B minor as well. F sharp, A, F sharp, and B. Probably not a tonic 7th chord in second inversion, but this A is a passing 7th, and this F sharp is a chord tone before we get G, G, E, and B. E minor over G, which is 4/6, a little neighboring 7th here in the alto as well, before we get A sharp, G, E, and F, which is A sharp fully diminished 7th. I think another way you could look at this is G as a 7/6 suspension over the bass, which I think in the grand scheme of things does make a lot of sense, because the next chord we have after this neighbor tone in the melody is A sharp, F sharp, E, and C sharp, which is F sharp 7 over A. It's a 5/6/5 chord. It's very seldom that we get two dominant triads that happen one after the other on the harmonic rhythm like this, but usually when you have two dominant triads especially, it's just extending the idea of the dominant. We have the leading tone with dissonances throughout the chord, and usually there's some type of buffer tone in between the two chords, despite them being similar. The B sort of creates a little bit of a barrier in between the two of them, as opposed to just having two chords that basically operate in terms of their role. They do the same thing basically. So yeah, this is kind of just like a big 5 chord. That's the way that I look at it. F sharp is a chord tone, E is a chord tone, and then we cadence on B minor. B, F sharp, D, and F sharp. Okay, next phrase ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D major. We start off with another B minor chord. B, D, B, and F sharp. No need to reanalyze. Passing 7th in the bass, and then we get G, E, B, and E, which is our 4 chord in first inversion. We've started off all of our phrases kind of like, we started the previous phrase like this, with this 1 to 4/6 progression. G is a chord tone, so we don't have to mark it, and F sharp is a passing tone. We then get F sharp, G sharp, B, and D. I reckon this F sharp's an accented non-chord tone, and this is really just our 4 chord in root position with the added 7th, which I do think takes us to the key of D major and turns into our 2/7 chord here, which then takes us to A, F sharp, A, and D. That's our tonic triad in second inversion. We know that this is usually an accessory to our 5 chord. The voice is usually resolved down by step, F sharp to E, and D to C sharp. D is also a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. And then we get A, E, A, and C sharp, which is our 5 chord. F sharp's a passing tone, G's a little neighboring 7th here, and sometimes analysts use that little bracket to show the relationship between the tonic 6/4 and the 5. That's how I learned how to do it, but you don't really need it there. It doesn't really add anything. And then we cadence on D major. D, F sharp, A, and D. Tonic triad, root position. Next phrase ends in an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of A. So we're looking for a point to modulate, and I think it happens around this G sharp here. We start off with A major, A, E, A, and C sharp. It's still our 5 chord here. We have G natural rather than G sharp. I think G sharp would be the tell if we had modulated by this point. We then have F sharp, A, and D, which is our tonic triad in first inversion. Then we have a passing tone in the bass, and then we have C sharp, E, A, and E. This D is an accented non-chord tone, and what's really being implied is A major over C sharp, and then we get D major, D, D, A, and F sharp. Tonic triad, root position, which also I think serves as our gateway to the key of A major. A is a chord tone, E is a non-chord tone, F sharp very, very briefly takes our chord and puts it in first inversion. I don't think it's super important, but the chord is entirely... Actually, no, I take that back. The chord is not entirely intact, so I will not mark that. And that's just a stylistic thing that I do. You could say that it's in first inversion at that point, but yeah, unless the chord has all the voices present off of the harmonic rhythm, I tend not to mark it. But that's why the videos are really helpful, because I can talk about it as I do it rather than just looking at the page. And then we get B, D, A, and F sharp. Now you could analyze this as B minor 7 in root position, but I think the bigger picture here is that this A is a 7/6 suspension over the bass, and really it's G sharp, B, D, and F sharp, which is 7/6/5. It is kind of rare to see it with the 7th in there, but the 7th's in the melody, so Bach harmonized it accordingly, and 4 going to 7 is a relatively common chord progression in Bach's chorales at least. And then that takes us to A major in first inversion, C sharp, A, and E, just 1/6. A little passing tone here in the bass. F sharp is a non-chord tone as well before we get E, B, G sharp, and E. That's our 5 chord in root position. A little neighbor tone here in the tenor as well. A little delayed passing 7th here in the melody. Let's see, E, B, G sharp, and D. We have actually an entirely intact 7 chord, just like the cadence at the beginning of the A section, so I think that's worth noting. Actually, these are very similar cadences, not identical, but what the melody's doing and what the bass is doing is very similar, so I think that's worth noting. We then end the phrase with A, E, and C sharp, tonic triad in root position. Now we get to the very interesting phrase. So we definitely end in an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of F sharp minor, but how we get to F sharp minor is definitely curious. So we start off with material in the key of B minor. I think comparing A major to F sharp major, you could say that we're still in the key of A major here and we're just tonicizing B, but I feel like having A sharp and A separated by the end of a phrase makes this phrase feel like its own thing, so I'm going to call this a direct modulation, and this is just our 5 chord in first inversion. A sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and C sharp. A little passing tone here in the melody and a little neighboring 7th as well. That takes us to B minor, B, C sharp, F sharp, and D. A little 9/8 suspension over our tonic triad here. Those are super common in Bach's chorale writing, the 9/8 suspension over the root position tonic triad. We then have an interesting chord here, B, C sharp, F sharp, and C sharp. I think we have kind of another interesting sort of like suspension-y chord here, where this B is a non-chord tone, and we actually have A, D sharp, F sharp, and C sharp. I think this B is also just by virtue of the fact that this B here on the bass is a non-chord tone. I think really the overall aggregate here is actually that C sharp would be a chord tone just coincidentally. I think this is either it's some type of dominant chord in relationship to E minor. I have it analyzed as 7/4/3, D sharp, fully diminished 7th over A, but you could also analyze it as 5/4/2 as well. I think regardless it's a big toss-up and it really doesn't make too much of a difference. It's another one of these sort of contrapuntal chords similar to what we saw here near the cadence of the end of the first phrase of the A section, but they both accomplish the same thing. So after that we have E minor like we would expect, G, E, G, and B. It's in first inversion. We do have a little bit of a reference to B minor here as well with B, D, F sharp, and B. So we could say that there is a tonic triad happening here in passing. But this is where it gets really interesting, what starts happening on the next beat, because we have also F sharp is a non-chord tone and D is a non-chord tone as well, before we get E, E, G, and B, which takes our 4 chord and puts it back into root position. B is a chord tone, C sharp is a chord tone, and D is a little neighboring 7th here like we've seen in some of the previous counterpoint like melody that we've seen up until this point. And then we get to this really curious section here. Bach creates a modulation to the key of F sharp minor, and the movement from E to F sharp minor, they probably have a chord in common, but I don't think that's what's happening here. I think because we're still sort of in this B minor idea, we've only really tonicized E minor here. There's one of two things happening here in my opinion. One is that we're modulating over a secondary dominant. So here we have C sharp, G sharp, G sharp, and C sharp. Sorry, this is an E sharp, which would be 5/6 of 5 in the key of F sharp minor, which also is our dominant in the key of F sharp minor, or Bach is modulating by sequence, which means that he's moving to the key of E minor here, and then he's moving to the key of F sharp minor here, and it's less important that Bach is doing so with common chords or logic in between them, but rather just the fact that he's using the same gesture and harmonic relationships between the voices to create the movement to F sharp minor. But I think this is a very rare case that Bach is modulating over a secondary dominant, because all in all, the melody sounds very B minor-like even up until the cadence. If it weren't for the strong pull towards F sharp minor and the supporting voices, I would think that this A would be part of a greater, it almost feels like this A should be an A sharp almost, and that's the only thing that really takes away from it being a B minor cadence. But regardless, whether there's some type of sequential modulation going on here, which would be like a direct modulation to F sharp minor, I think really what's happening here is Bach is tonicizing the 4, Bach is tonicizing the 5, and then cadencing in the key of the 5. But instead of making a half cadence, he's, like I just said, cadencing in the key of the 5, or the key of the dominant, the minor dominant, that is. But in the same way that we have this passing 1 chord happening in between these 2 chords here, we have F sharp, A, F sharp, and C, which is like our little tonic triad happening in first inversion. Or no, sorry, our tonic triad's in root position. It's happening after our 5 chord in first inversion. G sharp is a chord tone, B is a little passing 7th, and then we get C sharp, E, and C sharp, which is our 5 chord in root position before we get our cadence after this little delayed passing 7th here in the melody. And then we cadence in the key of our minor dominant, like I was talking about before, F sharp minor. And as we're getting ready for our last phrase, which ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of B minor, I think we move to the key of D major very briefly. So I think this F sharp minor chord actually is our gateway to the key of D major, interestingly enough. It turns into our 3 chord, and then we get some adjacent harmony, which kind of validates how 3 often operates in Bach's harmonic procedures. 3 will often go to 4, and that turns into like a spin-off that takes us towards 1 from the 4 going to 5, going to a 1, or 4 going to 7, going to 1. So here we have B, D, F sharp, and G, which is our 4 chord with the 7th in first inversion, so 4, 6, 5. Then we have F sharp, A, E, and G. Oh wait, did I say F sharp? C sharp, A, E, and G, which is our dominant in first inversion, 5, 6, 5. And that takes us to our tonic, D, A, D, and F sharp. Now you could analyze this in the key of B minor, basically from the beginning of the phrase, but this little subdivided progression here sounds so undeniably D major-like that I feel like it would be a little disingenuous to neglect that there. Sometimes we get little quasi-major progressions in minor keys, but it being the first thing that we hear in this phrase makes it feel that much more major than anything else. A little neighboring 7th here, a little passing tone here in the alto as well before we get, and actually that's a little passing 3, 4, 3 chord, and I think that that's significant actually. C sharp, A, E, and F sharp minor 7 over C sharp. And the reason why I think that's significant is because we go to 6 afterwards, and 3, like I was talking about before, often goes to 6. D, F sharp, and B here in the melody, which is our, like I said, our submediant in first inversion. After our 6 chord in first inversion, I think this is where we're moving to the key of B minor right here. I'm just going to use an arrow because I've kind of run out of space. We have another sort of interesting chord here. We have E, C sharp, G, and B. Also, this is our tonic triad in the key of B minor. We have, let's see, we have our 2 chord in first inversion with the 7th, C sharp minor 7 flat 5 over E, which is an interesting chord because typically speaking we would expect this to be a chord that bridges 2 D major chords, and with the lower voices with F sharps and Ds and F sharps in contact. It's almost like that was the intention of this progression. Like this would be like a 1 7 6 1 in the key of D major, but because these are B minor chords, it would be a 1 6 2 6 5 1 6 4 progression. And the thing that's just numerically interesting to me is the fact that 2 is going to 1 here, actually similar to the progression that we have. Let's see, where is it? It's a 2 6 5 going to a 1 6 4. Yeah, we have, no, it's not necessarily a 2 6 5, but we have 2 going into 1 6 4 in the middle of the two tonic triads, which I think is interesting. So after our 1 6 4 chord here, we have E, which is a non-chord tone, E, which is a non-chord tone, G natural, which is a non-chord tone, and C sharp, which is another 2 6 chord, C sharp diminished over E. Then we have D and F sharp again, which are rather two tones that are related to the B minor chord. They're in the chord. And that's going to take us to F sharp, C sharp, E, and A sharp, which is our 5-7 chord in root position. So we have another instance, and when I say another instance, I mean it's something that's come up actually quite a bit frequently in the chorales that I've analyzed recently, which is this interrupted 1 6 4 5 cadence where Bach will inject an additional chord in between the 1 6 4 resolving to the 5 chord, and it creates a similar effect, but he creates a buffer in between two chords that typically have kind of like they have a direct relationship with one another. The voices resolve very logically, but Bach incorporates another chord in between them, which a lot of the times is 2 6, and coincidentally 2 6 also wants to resolve to 5 for kind of the same reason that 1 wants to resolve to 5. But after our 5-7 chord, we have F sharp, we have F sharp, which is also a chord tone, we have E, which is also a chord tone, and then we cadence on our tonic in root position with the Picardy third. Bach often ends his minor chorales with the Picardy third. I think it has to do with his relationship with major chords having more of a final, final feel, like just they have more of like a cadential ending final quality in comparison to minor chords, but that's not always the case with Bach's minor chorales. He will end a minor chorale with a minor chord every once in a while as well. But I think I'm going to cap the video off on those thoughts. Really, the big takeaways from this chorale are, I'd say one of them is sort of like the chromatic nature of the bass line, where we have, E going to E sharp, going to F sharp, especially in this context here. Really, a lot of the intrigue comes from this particular section. We have 5 6 of 5 here turning into 5 of F sharp minor, and I think understanding that really this is sort of just like a big 1 4 5 progression in B minor terms, but the fact that it pivots and moves to F sharp minor at the end here is really fascinating, because there really is no normatively straightforward way to get from B minor to F sharp minor through the means that Bach did. So trying to justify how exactly this C sharp major chord operates when it is not tonicizing F sharp major, but rather F sharp minor, makes me feel like this secondary dominant is in fact the way that Bach is creating the channel that B minor moves to F, which is kind of interesting in comparison to how he modulated to F sharp minor here, just using B minor, which is a common chord between the two keys. And also the interrupted 1 6 4 to 5 cadence is kind of interesting as well. It's something that pops up every once in a while, but it's not very common. And I think those are really the only things that I wanted to touch on in terms of big takeaways. So we're going to cap the video off on those thoughts. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon and like the video as well if you enjoyed the content. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.